Hi, my name is Tori, and this is a Words in the World production. So today I'm going to be talking to you about metaphors. This video is actually a level 1 introduction to metaphors. So this is a way we can learn to talk about metaphors when we talk about theories or how they are used in experiments. So first thing we have to do is we have to talk about language, and when we're concerned with metaphors, usually we try and split language into two types, literal and figurative language. What we're mostly concerned with is the figurative language, because metaphors are part of figurative language. Other types of figurative language include similes, idioms, so idioms are things like I have cold feet, or happy as a clam, things like that. There's also personification, onomatopoeia, other things like that, usually things you would have learned in high school English class, that type of thing. But what we're mostly concerned with is metaphors. One distinction that we do have to make is metaphor versus similes. Metaphors are usually in a form A is B. So when we give an example, it would be, my lawyer is a shark. But similes are in a form A is like B. So we take the example we used, my lawyer is a shark, and it would be my lawyer is like a shark. One of the main things that we can notice right away from this is that similes are actually a type of literal language. Your lawyer can be like a shark, for sure. However, metaphors are different. When we say my lawyer is a shark, it's not actually literal language because, at least I hope, your lawyer is not actually a shark. And although we usually talk about metaphors in the A is B format, we can also talk about them in a compound structure. So instead of my lawyer is a shark, it can also be a shark lawyer. So the main question is why are metaphors special? Well, like we just discussed in the previous slide, metaphors are not any kind of literal language, so they're different from things like similes. And when we have a metaphor, we usually have this emergent meaning that comes from the combination of both parts. And that meaning is not necessarily either of the salient attributes of either part of the metaphor. So when we talk about my lawyer is a shark, if we have people list the attributes of a shark, we might have things like lives in the ocean, swims, is a type of fish, eats seals, that type of thing. On the other hand, if we have people list attributes of a lawyer, we might get person, a professional, someone who's well educated or smart. But when we combine them in this metaphor form, so my lawyer is a shark, we get attributes like aggressive or bloodthirsty that are not necessarily in the beginning parts of the list for either attribute by itself, but when combined, come up with this type of emergent meaning. So when we're talking about metaphors, this is something that we definitely do have to take into account. Just like I mentioned, we have an A is B form. We can also have a compound form, so you can either have my lawyer is a shark, or you can have shark lawyer. And so to help us distinguish, no matter what type of form we're using, we usually talk about the different parts as their own thing. So A is B. The A we would refer to as the topic. So in the lawyer is a shark case, the topic is lawyer. And then B is actually the vehicle. So my lawyer is a shark, the vehicle would be the shark. And then when we talk about meaning, usually what we use is the term ground. So the ground of my lawyer is a shark would be something like aggressive. Other things that we do have to consider when we talk about metaphors is the difference between novel and conventional metaphors. So a conventional metaphor would be the ones that we used in this example. So my lawyer is a shark is a conventional metaphor. Conventional metaphors are usually understood by everyone who uses the language, or at least every native speaker of the language. and they're used in everyday life, that type of thing, and we almost always have a very similar understanding of the emergent meaning of the metaphor. On the other hand, there are things that are novel metaphors, so maybe things that you read in books, or the example I give here is my lawyer is a table. That's probably not something you've ever heard before, but we can still come up with an emergent meaning from it, something like rigid or rough, something like that. We would still be able to come up with a meaning to the metaphor, although we haven't ever necessarily encountered that metaphor before. And there is a difference between novel and conventional metaphors. We can talk about the differences when we talk about theories or when we talk about experiments, but there is a difference between the two, and we do have to make that at least a sort of a distinction between them. So some questions you might have now near the end of this program is, when is a metaphor an idiom? So we talked about conventional metaphors, and some of these conventional metaphors are so well used in everyday language that maybe they become something more, maybe they become more than just a metaphor. So where is the point where it's just a conventional metaphor that maybe turns into something else? And the other thing that should be very obvious to you right now is, how do we actually form this metaphor meaning? How do we get from the different parts of lawyer and shark to this emergent meaning? And if you stick around, I will be talking about some classic theories on how we actually form that meaning in the second video. So please stick around for that, especially if you're interested in this question of how do we form the metaphor meaning. So I just want to give you a quick summary now. We did talk about language and how we usually try and separate language into literal and figurative language when we're talking about metaphors. And we also have to make that distinction between metaphor and similes. So the metaphor is the A is B, and the simile is A is like B. And then we talked about the parts of the metaphor, so the vehicle, the topic, and the ground. So there is a part 2 where I talk about the classic theories. So if you were interested in how do we actually form a metaphor meaning, please move on to that part of the video. If not, thank you for watching.